If you have a piece of land, there are numerous different things you can do with it. Firstly, you could do nothing. Give it over entirely to nature. See which plants populate the area of their own accord. Let wild animals come and go as they please and eat what they like. Local deer are likely to be particularly fond of this land use strategy. You might choose some light touch management. Culling of herbivores when populations get too high to ensure flora can regenerate naturally. But as a landowner, you'll probably prefer your land to make you some money. To do so, you could cut down the trees, which have no economic value, to make timber, which does. You could drain the land to turn areas prone to flooding into usable farmland. Floodplains, despite providing fantastic habitat for hundreds of species and being vital flood defences, cannot produce you an income. Farmland can. You could plant crops, spray them with fertiliser and pesticides, which, although degrading the soils and killing wildlife, will increase the yield to give you a greater income. If your land is in an upland area that is not suitable for growing crops, you could bring livestock like sheep onto your land, allowing them to graze and using them to generate an income by selling their meat. This is what many landowners do, following incentive structures in a purely rational manner, pushing nature to the margins. 70% of the UK is farmland. Despite this, we import around 46% of our food. How can this be? In the past 60 years, UK livestock numbers have doubled, whilst wildlife numbers have plummeted by 41%. Only 16% of UK rivers and lakes meet good ecological status. Much of this degradation is linked to farming runoff. Our land is not producing sufficient food, and it is decimating nature. It is the worst of both worlds. Of course, much of the food we have become accustomed to eating cannot be easily grown in the UK, and a resilient food system should strike a balance between homegrown and imported food. However, we are not as efficient or strategic as we could be in how we use our land. 85% of the farmland that feeds the UK is used to rear animals, even though meat, dairy and eggs account for just 32% of the calories we eat. A 30% reduction in meat and dairy consumption would free up land equivalent to the size of Wales. It would be more efficient to use this land to produce food for direct human consumption, or use the land to meet other priorities, such as carbon sequestration and improvement of habitat for wildlife, combating the two most significant challenges of the 21st century. In addition, the least productive 20% of our land produces just 3% of our calories. Given the competing demands for our land and the varying purposes it needs to fulfill, this land could certainly be put to much better use. Of course, we need our land to do more than just produce our food for us. We must build housing and infrastructure so people have places to live and work and can travel across the country via road or rail. Development requires comparatively little land, but not all development is created equal. A modern housing estate, for example, is typically low density, highly car dependent and ecologically dead. However, the gentle density that exists in the most coveted areas of many of Britain's cities is more aesthetically pleasing, better for people and for nature. Rather than an array of cut and paste astroturf, lifeless gardens, garden squares and crescents can be managed by the community to accommodate more wildlife and create space for people to meet. We also need to grow timber, which is a renewable, sustainable building material. We are currently highly dependent on imports, importing 73% of the timber we use. In a world of geopolitical instability, this creates vulnerability. Timber security is hardly spoken about, but it's a real strategic threat. Producing renewable energy requires land. Wind turbines and solar panels are essential for a zero-carbon future, but they still require space. Large-scale solar farms now occupy increasing swathes of farmlands, while onshore wind demands open landscapes and open access routes. Though far cleaner than fossil fuels, renewables can displace nature or food production if not carefully sited. Like all other land uses, they come with trade-offs, and without proper planning, even clean energy can crowd out the natural world. With a more strategic approach to land use, we might prioritise rooftops, car parks and warehouses for solar, spaces already built over, sun exposed and largely overlooked. In France, solar panels are now a legal requirement over large car parks. In the UK, no such policy exists. Instead, fields are often the easier option, not necessarily the best one, just the one that fits most comfortably with the planning system as it stands. Looking to the future, demands on the land are going to continue to intensify. This does not bode well for nature. The UK population continues to rise and housing is already in short supply, meaning we will have to continue to develop our land. Gentle density, sustainable building materials, public transport and active travel infrastructure can contribute towards development that improves human and planetary health, as opposed to the destructive, car-dependent suburban sprawl that reigns supreme today. Biofuels are a worrying development that could significantly increase pressure on the land. The amount of wheat that can fulfill the calorific requirement for one person for a day is only enough to power a small petrol car for 1.5 miles. In other words, we would need huge amounts of crops to power any substantial travel using biofuel. In an unregulated free market, biofuel for the rich could become more profitable than essential food for the poor. And there would be further incentives for landowners to plant monocultures and maximise yield above all else. Nature is the only way of drawing down carbon from the atmosphere and the most effective tool we have to combat global warming. We cannot afford to allow the inefficiencies of the least productive animal agriculture to prevail in the 21st century. Strategic priorities of carbon sequestration, biodiversity protection, food security and timber security must be adequately addressed. There are two main schools of thought around how we use our land: land sharing and land sparing. Land sharing, also known as agroecological farming, is a way of farming where farmers deliberately share their land with nature. This typically results in yields that are 20 to 40% lower, but creates space much more hospitable to wildlife. Because yields are lower, more land is required to produce the same amount of food. In addition, while some species can thrive on this traditional farmland, some species require much wilder spaces to thrive. Therefore, if all farms adopted this model, it would require more land, further depleting the wilder landscapes that some species prefer. Some argue that the land-sparing approach is preferable. Under this model, high-yielding farmland is farmed intensely with large monocultures or livestock herds, without trees, ponds and hedgerows. Whilst this space is inhospitable to nature, it is the best way to produce a lot of food on a comparatively small amount of land, which could in theory free up the lower yielding farmland for larger scale nature restoration. In all likelihood, a mixed approach is best. Some land should be intensively farmed to produce large amounts of food. Some land should be farmed agroecologically, and some land should be given over to nature if we are to produce the food we need whilst also allowing nature to thrive. From sheep-grazed uplands to fertilised floodplains to astroturfed new builds, every inch of this country carries the imprint of human decision. Some are made in Westminster, some on farms, but many were shaped in supermarket aisles and drive-thrus. As consumers, we vote every day for efficiency, for convenience, for meat, for nature, or for none of the above. Meat has long been a part of our landscape, woven into farming traditions, our diet, even our identity. But in the past 60 years, its footprint has ballooned beyond all proportion. We now use the majority of our farmland to produce a minority of our calories, and we're all paying for that inefficiency through degraded soils, polluted rivers, and vanishing wildlife. It's time to build a food system and a landscape that respects the traditions of the past, but also reflects the priorities of today.